Hey guys, it's Layla from Ignite, and in today's video I'm going to take you through my key bits of advice on preparing an essay for T.S. Eliot. But before I get into that, please do like and subscribe to our channel and click the bell for notifications so that you're alerted when new content comes out. And if you are looking for resources to help you navigate your way through your HSC studies, check out our website at Ignite HSC. But for now, let's get into today's video. So in this clip, I'm going to take you through my kind of key bits of advice, candid advice, on how to approach writing an essay on T.S. Eliot. And I think the first thing to note, and what I would flag to my own students, is that Module B is probably the easiest module to prepare for, in the sense that unlike Module A, where you're taking two texts, you're bringing them into direct proximity and conversation, you're dealing with two contexts, two different sets of form, Module B allows you to go into nice, narrow depth on one composer and to know that composer at a really kind of critical level. And I think that that narrow way of thinking is conducive to you developing a lot of depth in your understanding of T.S. Eliot, and you can use that to your advantage. Conversely, I also think that when we look at the common module, you're kind of restricted in terms of the ideas that you're extracting from a text. Whereas with Module B, you kind of have free rein to look for what interests you in these texts and what you think you understand quite well. And you can make the question in the exam, because questions are quite flexible for Module B, you can make them work for what you want to go on to say. So what I've established so far is that there's a lot of room for critical depth, and it's narrow, the focus of Module B, which I think works in your favor as a student. And you have a lot of flexibility, unlike the common module rubric, which governs what you can explore in your text through, of course, the rubric having all of those key terms that you need to be familiar with. The rubric for Module B doesn't really give you that. It's just asking you to know your text and to know your text very well. So what is the rubric asking for? It's asking for the student to have sophisticated, critical, and in-depth understanding of the text that they have studied. That means that you need to not only be on top of the content of the poetry in terms of the ideas that it explores, right, the subject matter itself, you need to be quite well versed in describing and characterising indeed how Eliot presents the ideas in his poetry. What form does he use? What are the kind of stylistic elements of his writing that work to characterise the way that he writes? What makes his voice distinctive? How do we consider elements of Eliot's context, and in what ways does his context reflect the way that he writes? In a rather reciprocal sense, how does Eliot inform our understanding of modernism? How was he a leader in terms of establishing what modernist writing looked like and what it would explore? And you also need to have good textual evidence to back up everything that you're saying. Taking it a little bit further, if you want to do very well in Module B, you can also engage in critical interpretations of T.S. Eliot and kind of use those and unpack how your engagement with the perceptions of others reading T.S. Eliot has informed and developed your own personal voice in engaging with his poetry. So at a glance, these are the kinds of ideas that we're looking for in the poetry of T.S. Eliot. We're looking for critical knowledge that has been informed by context, content, form, and close analysis, and you can draw on the interpretations of others to enhance your point of view. So that's our kind of introduction, that's our starting point for addressing this topic. What I want to do now is just show you a couple of past paper questions, and I think this is important because it frames for you the kind of essay you're working towards. I always do that with my students. Whenever we're starting a module, and I advise you to do the same, look up past paper questions to know the kind of essay you're writing, because that just gives purpose to what you're doing as you're making your way through these texts. What kind of evidence am I looking for? How much evidence do I need from my text? And then you can start scaffolding an exemplar essay that you will of course memorize and adapt to different question types. So let's have a look. What kind of questions are we answering for T.S. Eliot? So this is a 2019 Nesta past paper. It reads, "People are half alive, hungry for any form of spiritual experience. To what extent does this view align with your understanding of Eliot's poetry?" So we know that questions might give us a critical interpretation or a stance on Eliot's poetry, or in this case it's a removed statement describing how we could actually view the personas in Eliot's poetry. and it's introducing some of the themes that lie at the heart of Eliot's work, that people are disillusioned, there's a sense of existentialism that describes their mindset, and that they're looking for some sense of spiritual renewal. One thing I think to note here is that when we look at Eliot's body of work, and we think about that rubric term textual integrity, there are underlying ideas that tie together his body of poetry. So you're quite limited in terms of the kinds of themes the question will throw at you, because all of the poems are exploring a limited number of themes and they're recurring throughout all of the poems. So if you're touching on ideas in your exemplar, on ideas such as, mortality, or the mundanity of everyday existence, the failure of spiritual renewal, crisis in masculinity, neurotic isolation, the decay of the urban landscape, those 5 or 6 ideas really lie at the heart of everything you study in the poems. My advice to you would be, through preparing those big juicy ideas that really underpin what Eliot explores, you're prepared for any question really that will come your way. So that's last year's paper. So you can see, having paragraphs that are thematic based, knowing Eliot's context, knowing how he explores these thematic ideas that could be malleable to different questions, is a good way to start your preparation. We'll have a look at a couple more questions. Okay, so this one was taken from an independent school's trial paper, and we've got another statement. A good text has something to say and says it well. How accurate is this statement in relation to your text, considering the different contexts in which a text can be received? So there are 3 main ideas that this question has raised. The first one is, what kinds of ideas does Eliot raise? What themes? Second one, what form is used to explore these ideas? Does it well? So what about Eliot's form allows him to explore these ideas in an effective way? And then also the question is raising issues of context and the enduring value of T.S. Eliot. So not only what ideas does he convey and how do they connect through their representation, through the form he mobilises, but also what about these ideas carry enduring value? What allows them to appeal to a contemporary reader? So again, when you compare this question to the previous one, if you've got an essay here which is exploring the underlying ideas that underpin Eliot's poetry, and these ideas, by the way, are not exclusive to Eliot's world, right? Conceptions of isolation, conceptions of human loneliness, the decay of the modernising world, they don't isolate themselves from our contemporary existence, right? When you're approaching Eliot, think about the way that our current context exists as a trajectory from the world that Eliot was describing, okay? And how developments in context allow our world to indeed parallel in many ways to the issues that Eliot was raising at his time. So I guess what we're establishing so far in looking at these questions is that addressing the overarching key themes in Eliot's work and preparing a scaffold that gets to the heart of those ideas whilst addressing their transcending value, the context of Eliot and elements of form, these are really the key ingredients to writing an essay on T.S. Eliot. We'll have a look at one more question. Interpretations of a text can change according to time and place. Considering your time and place as a responder, reflect on the ways in which context has shaped your critical interpretation of your prescribed text. So, interpretations of a text can change according to time and value. So, interpretations of a text, this is your kind of flag for raising what are your ideas that you see relevant in Eliot's work, what are your interpretations? And then we're discussing how your context has informed the way that you relate to these ideas. So quite similar to what I raised in relation to the previous question, you want to think about what elements of your contemporary context relate or indeed parallel to, in Eliot's world, those issues of modernity, those issues of existential existence, those issues of feeling a sense of isolation. How do they relate to our contemporary context? Connect them, and you would bring in that personal interpretation to your essay. So what's recurring throughout all of these questions is that you have a fair bit of scope to govern the themes that you discuss in this essay. Even though the first question specifically raised spiritual fulfillment, issues such as the decay of the modern landscape or a crisis in connection or alienation relate to the need for spiritual fulfillment. So my point is, whatever themes you prepare, if they're relevant to all of the poems, you'll be safe in the exam. But just make sure that the way that you're addressing these themes ties in, of course, content from the text in terms of textual evidence, language analysis, and analysis of form. So what I'm hoping is that by this point in the clip, you can see, okay, these are the kinds of questions I'm being asked in the exam. These are the sorts of things I need to include in my essay. Now I'm going to be a little bit more practical and take you through the steps that I usually give to my own students when they're looking at past paper questions and how to write their actual exemplar essay. So when you're approaching your study over the next module, or if you're revising your notes now, this is what I think you should do. Number one, you ought to read all of the poems. When you're reading all of the poems, look at the poem, have a bit of a synopsis or a summary about what each of those poems is exploring. Flag maybe 3 or 4 key themes that you see as salient in those texts. Flag recurring elements of form in that text, or how you would characterize key elements of that text construction. For example, is an archetypal persona used? Does he use a particular meter in that poem? Does he use vignettes? Is there a sense of fragmentation? So what are the macro elements of that poem's construction? And then go through and highlight your key quotes that relate to those salient themes. And as you're going through the poem, start to think about, okay, what are the big themes that I'm resonating with the most in the poems? And start gathering your evidence for each of those themes. Now, what you're doing there is you're starting to foresee what your paragraphs will look like. Now, my advice to you is when you're thinking about your paragraphs, I would go with 1 poem per paragraph. That's not the only way you can approach T.S. Eliot, but I think 3 paragraphs exploring 1 poem each relating to key ideas in Eliot's work is a safe way of going about your study. What I would then advise you to do is to prepare supplementary quotes on 2 poems that aren't featuring in your exemplar. And that way, if they do happen to ask for a specific poem in the exam, you're still covered in that way. You can just sort of supplement it in and perhaps take one of the other poems out. So read through, annotate, know what's happening in the poems, find your preferred 3 poems, annotate those well, and now you've got, some content that you're working with in each of your paragraphs. As you're analysing those distinct poems and you're thinking about which quotes you want in each paragraph, I would say 3 to 4 is reasonable. Make sure you're linking the representations in that poem to specific elements of Eliot's world, and foresee how you might relate those elements of context to your contemporary context to bring in that personal voice. Make sure you're including form in every single paragraph. You're thinking about characterising the macro elements of the modernist nature of Eliot's quintessential voice. Have a look at some critical interpretations of the text. For critical interpretations, you can use databases like JSTOR or Google Scholar, or even at your school, speak to your librarian. Your school might have databases that they've given you access to, and you can look up specific poems. A lot of schools will have the Cambridge Companion to T.S. Eliot in your library if you are studying that text, and that also offers some really good views. Remember, with critics though, you're not using the critic to govern your understanding of the poetry. Instead, you're using the critic's voice to explain, how their interpretation has challenged or enhanced your personal reading of the poetry. So you want to come back to your voice in the essay. Once you've gotten your context there, finalise your structure. What key ideas am I exploring in each paragraph? And also consider, do they flow well? Is there a nice logical progression? I wouldn't start off my essay looking at a poem like Journey of the Magi, for example. You don't want to open with the sense of spiritual fulfillment or lack thereof, depending on how you interpret the poem in your very first paragraph. You want to build towards that. Start perhaps with an representation or an exploration of the external landscape, the world that Eliot is depicting. Then perhaps in your second paragraph, how that internally manifests within the mind of the persona. And then in your third paragraph, if there's a resolution that's offered to these crises in Eliot's world. So I'd work through it in that way. And then of course, once you've finalised that exemplar essay, you time it, make sure that it's reasonable for the exam, and practice it. Test it against lots of practice questions, and you can start with the 3 that I've given you in this clip. Okay guys, I hope that you're feeling like you've got a better grip on Module B if you are studying T.S. Eliot. You're familiar with the kinds of questions you're going to be asked. You know that the purpose here is to build critical and in-depth understanding of Eliot's work. You need to read the poems, gather your evidence, think about the themes you want per paragraph, include context, form, critical interpretations, and make sure that your own personal reading is at the real backbone of this essay. And if you're doing all of that, I think you're setting yourself up in a position to do quite well. If you have more questions about how I've framed your preparation process for writing an essay on Eliot, please do comment and I'll do my best to get back to you. But for now, guys, thank you so much for watching. And if you do want that extra help in drafting your Eliot essay, check out our resources at Ignite HSC. We have close analysis on all of the text and exemplar paragraph extracts as well that would feature in an essay. So if you want that guidance, please do check it out. And also like and subscribe to our channel and click the bell for notifications. But for now, guys, thank you again so much for watching, and I do hope to see you in the next video. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you do like the content, subscribe to our channel and we'll have more videos coming your way.
That's right, guys. Thanks for watching. And please make sure you check out our online resource database. We've had a team of state rank achievers and heads of English put these together for you, covering everything from essay structures and examples all the way through to craft of writing and comprehension skills. So check them out at ignitehse.com.au, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.